I never thought a single decision could consume my life so completely, or change the people around me in ways I couldn't have imagined. But that's exactly what happened the summer I turned 19 in 1851 in Virginia on a plantation called Belmont Estate. And I have to ask you right now, if you were in my place, could you have walked away? Because looking back, I still can't tell if I was the cause of what happened, or just a witness to it. Let me start from the beginning, though, because you need to understand the world I was born into to truly grasp the horror of those months. I had been purchased by Thomas Rutled, the owner of Belmont Estate, through a trader named Samuel Wickham, who specialized in unusual acquisitions, as he liked to call them. I wasn't a field hand. I was something entirely different, or at least, that's what they wanted me to be. I was trained to submit, to obey, to be seen as a phenomenon rather than a person, and the moment Thomas laid eyes on me, he was fascinated in a way that went beyond mere curiosity. His wife, Catherine, became equally obsessed almost instantly, though in her own peculiar manner. She wasn't cruel, not overtly, but there was an intensity in her attention that left me both terrified and entranced. Thomas brought me to the estate office first, and I remember the weight of his gaze like it was pressing down on my chest. Wickham had described me in clinical terms: a medical curiosity, a hermaphrodite, young, obedient, and capable of enduring examinations without resistance. But being described like that, seeing their eyes on me, I realized I was more than an object. They were both seeing something impossible in me, and I didn't yet understand what it was even myself. When Thomas finally led me to my quarters, it wasn't the cabins like the others lived in. No, he placed me in a small, isolated cottage on the edge of the gardens, far enough from the main house to be private, yet close enough for them to call upon me at will. That isolation was both a prison and a shield, and it set the tone for what was to come. I had been trained to serve without question, and for weeks I did just that. But the tension in the house was palpable. Catherine began visiting me often, under the pretense of wanting to understand me, to see my condition, to study me, though she never admitted that aloud. Her fascination grew daily, and Thomas's obsession mirrored hers in a more analytical, almost clinical way. He would read books on anatomy and rare medical conditions, taking notes, sketching diagrams, comparing them to me, while Catherine would dress me in different garments, feminine, masculine, and sometimes ambiguous, to see how my form could be interpreted, manipulated, and observed. Their attentions were suffocating, yet I couldn't move away. The plantation itself seemed to continue in a parallel world, with the field hands performing their duties, the barns filled with the smell of curing tobacco, and the estate appearing normal from the outside. But inside, in that cottage and the upstairs room where I was moved eventually, the rules of the world were entirely different. Thomas and Catherine's lives began revolving around me. They would disappear for hours, sometimes days, leaving the estate partially neglected. The other enslaved people whispered, speculating, fearful of speaking openly. They saw the obsession, the strange patterns, the way Thomas would pace the halls at night, feverishly scribbling in a hidden journal, while Catherine's appearance deteriorated, her once luxurious hair often unwashed, her dresses hanging loosely on her frail frame. I didn't want to notice the changes at first, but I couldn't avoid them. Their attention was a mirror that reflected not only my own existence, but also their hidden desires, fears, and emptiness. I had no choice but to bear witness, to comply, to be present in a way that was both passive and painfully intimate. And then the whispers among the other slaves turned into a murmur of dread when two field hands, Samuel and Isaac, attempted to escape. They were caught and punished severely, a reminder that the world outside my immediate reality was still cruel, rigid, and violent. Their fear reinforced my isolation. I began to feel a strange power in their obsession with me, a dangerous influence that I had never anticipated. It was intoxicating to see how their lives twisted around my presence, and yet it was terrifying to realize that I could not step outside the roles they had forced upon me. Weeks passed in this pattern. Catherine would spend afternoons instructing me, observing me, speaking in hushed tones that hinted at something forbidden. Thomas would return from his study, notes in hand, examining me with clinical fascination, sometimes lingering in ways that made my skin crawl. Their obsession escalated into rituals. Hours spent together in a closed room, measuring, documenting, and manipulating my appearance. They were not malicious in the traditional sense, but their need to control and understand something beyond comprehension consumed them completely. I became a conduit for their desires, their curiosities, their shared secret that bound them in a twisted intimacy. And that's when I realized this wasn't just fascination. It was an obsession that would leave scars far deeper than anything physical. One night, Catherine asked me to kneel beside her at the edge of the bed, examining my features in the candlelight. She whispered questions about my body, my past, my training, and I answered in my neutral, practiced tone, concealing the fear that curled in my stomach. Thomas watched silently from the corner, scribbling into his journal. The tension in the room was almost unbearable, a silent electricity that made my pulse hammer. The next day, I overheard a conversation through the thin walls. Thomas and Catherine discussing how my presence had altered their marriage, their lives, and their understanding of themselves. They spoke of control, obsession, and fascination, words that should never have been applied to a human being in such a personal, consuming way. I realized then that I was no longer just an individual. They had projected onto me a void they both could not fill, and in doing so, they had trapped themselves. As autumn turned to late fall, the estate fell further into disarray. Bills were unpaid, meetings missed, crops tended haphazardly, while upstairs in the third-floor room, Thomas and Catherine continued their secret study. The other slaves began to fear me not because of what I had done, but because of what they saw me doing, what I was forced to endure, and what I represented, a mirror of obsession, curiosity, and human fragility. I want you to pause for a moment and think about this. If you were in my shoes, witnessing two people completely consumed by something you are, would you have tried to intervene? Could you have walked away? Because that's exactly the choice I faced, and it haunted me every single day. The climax came on a bitter November night, when the candlelight flickered against the walls of the third-floor room. Thomas had been feverish, his hands shaking as he recorded observations, while Catherine moved silently, her eyes wide and haunted. Something broke that night, not in me, but in them. An argument flared over my condition, my presentation, the impossibility of what they were trying to comprehend. Their obsession collided, turning inward, and I could feel the air thickening, heavy with unspoken tension. It was a violent emotional explosion, but still contained within the walls of that room. I stayed motionless, a witness, as Thomas shouted, Catherine wept, and their carefully maintained control crumbled into something raw and human. The aftermath was swift and brutal in its quiet way. Thomas became ill in the following days, retreating into himself, unable to manage the estate. Catherine withdrew completely, leaving the household and social obligations behind. The plantation, once prosperous, began to fail. Crops went untended, debts mounted, and the outside world took notice. The other enslaved people whispered, but they were careful. They had seen how obsession could destroy not only the observers, but also the observed. I remained in that room for weeks, carrying their attention, their obsession, and the echo of that night. When winter arrived, the estate was sold, sealed, and largely abandoned. Thomas and Catherine vanished from public view. Official records were destroyed, as if the world itself was trying to erase what had happened inside Belmont Estate. And yet, the story persisted in whispered accounts, in the memories of those who had been present, and in me, the one they had both made the center of their lives. Looking back, I can't tell you if what happened was inevitable, or if the human fascination with the impossible will always spiral into obsession when given the chance. I only know that I survived it, that I bore witness, and that the impact of their obsession lingers like a shadow over my memory. The moral, if there is one, is both simple and terrifying. Sometimes, being unique is less about who you are and more about what you represent to others. People will project, obsess, and even destroy themselves in an attempt to understand what defies explanation. So now I want you to reflect. Were Thomas and Catherine victims of circumstance, or were they architects of their own undoing? Could you have resisted such obsession, or would you have succumbed to? I'll leave that for you to decide. If you are on my side, struggling to maintain your humanity amidst obsession, like this video and subscribe for more stories like this. Share your final thoughts on this entire mess in the comment section. I'm genuinely curious to hear if anyone could have walked away. I'll see you all in the next story.